When you have red tape and corruption, typically it impacts negatively business and GDP growth. In China, it was the opposite. Everybody living in China, especially in those years, they know that corruption was a fundamental part of the way companies operate, private and public, but mostly public and state-owned enterprises. But at the same time was a corruption that in so many ways was conducive to doing business.
Hello and welcome to the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast, where we interview business leaders and emerging market experts on business innovations, market opportunities, and macro-level trends in emerging and frontier market countries. Join us for the next hour to dive deep into the world of emerging markets as we speak with top performers who are successfully investing, working, and living in these markets themselves. Hello and welcome to the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast. Today, our guest is Javier Cunat. Javier is an INSEAD executive MBA who graduated in 2014. Prior to that, he lived and worked in China for 12 years, and he has been in Mexico for the past 6 years. He's currently the COO and director at Diligo. He directs the Founder Institute in San Jose del Cabo in Mexico, and he has lots of experience in other startups and businesses across the world, from China to Africa to Mexico, which I'd love to talk to him more about. As I mentioned, he's leading Diligo, which is a company that offers CFO services for startups. And I think we'll focus a lot on what Diligo does, but I'd love to learn a bit more about your journey, Javier, and what led you to the role you're in at Diligo now. So maybe we could talk about what first brought you to China and work our way to what you're doing now in Mexico.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Nick. Well, I come from Spain originally, so I studied and worked my early days in Europe. That was Spain, spent also 1 year in Belgium and 1 year in France. I've been always, very INSEAD in my heart, in a way that my brain and my heart, they're very multicultural. And I started looking for opportunities in the Far East. That was 2004, 2005. So China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. So I think, and I studied economics, right? So, if you read a little bit of what's going on in the world economy, it wasn't hard to understand that something was cooking in Asia. So I started looking for job opportunities, mostly in China. I looked into India. And finally, I got a job. I worked for the commercial section of a regional government of Spain in China. So I was sent there to help Spanish businesses to export their goods and services and to set up operations in China. And that's how I landed in China. It's just my willingness to have an international life. Very simple. At that time, China was, was the Far East. Nobody really knew what was going on. It was the very, very early days. Everything changed in 2008, though. After the Olympics, absolutely everything changed, right? I arrived in 2005. Still had a couple of days which were very raw from a business perspective. Everything was difficult. Still it is, but very, very raw. I spent 12 years in China, mostly doing management consulting. So from this job working for regional government of Spain, I shifted into financial management for a Spanish multinational, and then shifted into management consulting for an international company called the Beijing Axis. This company was invested by a Fortune 1000 called Imperial at a later stage. It was around that time that I decided to move. That was 2016 or 17. So at that time, I was 12 years in China. I had plenty of friends, plenty of experience in China. I'm happy with what I had achieved. I had my girlfriend at that time, who is my wife today, kind of opened a window where we had to decide if we stay or we move, right? So I was in a bit of a transition at work. I had to decide if I stay or I move. And my wife had finished her studies and we decided to move. We considered several options. Stay in Asia was one option. Going back to Spain, where I come from, was another option. And coming to Mexico was another option. And we decided to come to Mexico. I think, and this is probably against everything that I was taught in the MBA, because as an executive MBA, I know you guys in the MBA program, you do that. But in the executive MBA, which I did in China, that INSEAD has a joint venture with Tsinghua, which is China's main university, an MBA program. they focus a lot on leadership and leadership change and who you are and knowing yourself and all that. But, one thing is what you learn in school, sort of say, a different thing is life. And I was in a moment in my life where I was not finding really myself in what I was doing. I was burned out, management consulting is tough, and it's beautiful. I love the industry, but there is time for everything in life. And for me, I was done with that kind of long hours and stress and dynamics. Great company, great people, really, in the Beijing axis and in Imperial. But I kind of felt that we needed to move somewhere else. So we packed and we moved to Mexico. I think it was a decision made with our heart. We came to a very beautiful place in Mexico. We used to come here on holidays because my wife was raised here. This is Southern California, Baja California Sur. You get the American California, you go south, and this is where you get. And we moved here with just a lot of entrepreneurial ideas. We married here and we stayed, and it's been 6 years so far. My wife started her own business. She's doing great. I started my own business. I failed. I didn't do well for some time. Then things started kicking off. And right now I'm partner in a quite successful CFO advisory firm, which is Diligo. So probably a very long explanation. But again, very inside in absolutely everything that I do. Very multicultural. I love adventure. I think life, it is an adventure. You cannot expect things to go right all the time. Not wrong all the time. Life, it is what it is. It's an adventure. And that's what I've been doing most of my life. I think moving quite a bit, trying new things, trying to find myself in what I do, be happy. And I've learned a lot on the way, and I'm still learning things like more of an entrepreneurial animal and more of a smaller, medium-sized organizations where I have a space to create and innovate. I'm more of a person that finds himself comfortable in risky environments, emerging countries, right? I love that. That's one of the reasons I didn't move back to Europe. Like it is structure and it's boring in a way. And we are growing at 0.5%. And all that saying, there's some of the elements that probably they've been a common factor in my life and in my decision-making process till today.
Yeah. I really like that. I really like the theme of just following your heart. I think you can do a lot of analysis, but you really only have one life to live. So sometimes it's best just to follow the heart and figure out the details later, because you can do a lot of analysis and then end up where you don't want to be and have to end up following the heart eventually anyway. So one thing I'd be curious learning more about in China before we move on to Diligo is you were there pre-2008 in kind of the early period when people were just getting into China, and that was before their massive growth over the past decade plus to become a major superpower and all that. And I was wondering if there was any learning from that experience that has helped you later in life with what you're doing now, because a lot of times on this podcast, we focus on the really fast growth countries like Vietnam or even Bangladesh that are more in that growth stage now or just hitting it right now, as China was maybe 2 decades ago. So it's pretty interesting to get the insights from talking to someone who actually experienced that in China. And I'd love to learn if there's any ways that you approach business or life that have been affected by that experience, even if you're no longer in China.
Totally. I mean, I love China. It was an amazing experience. My wife is half Chinese. My father-in-law is Chinese. I've got a lot of Chinese friends from the MBA still in China. Now China is a place more difficult to travel in and out because of the COVID situation, but overall it was an outstanding experience. Before I answer that question, I just don't want to forget, you mentioned something that is very important, right? When you said, well, you follow your heart when making your decisions. You're completely right. But something that I learned as well in that process is that following your heart all the time is not necessarily the right thing to do. I think it has to be a combination of things. I think the heart should always lead. I mean, that's my experience, right? And I learned this deciding by heart. But life is just not heart only. There are so many other physical aspects that they need to be considered. And I'm typically not afraid of risks, and, I follow my intuition, and I've made bold decisions in my life that I've learned they're not always the best. So the best example was moving from China to Mexico. I think was a decision definitely made with our heart, not much thinking. It's like, fuck it, we're going to do this. And that was great, right? But looking back, a little bit of planning, a little bit of brain cells to that decision-making mix would have been great too. So following your heart always, I think it's a combination of things. I wouldn't advise my kids to follow their heart all the time, I think, or to follow their passions. I don't think it's the right thing to have. I don't think it's a good advice. I think it's critical to have a heart and to follow it. I think it's critical to have passions and to follow it. But they're not just the only thing. It's a combination of things, right? And that was part of my journey, right? When you're younger, I'm 43 years old now. When you're younger, I think you tend to think in those terms. You're more a risk-loving individual. And it's not that I'm risk-averse now. It's just that I consider other elements. And I think I'm more aware of my environment, I think more aware of how I interact with the stakeholders, family, friends, clients, suppliers. I pretty much cut everything overnight, and that's probably not the smartest thing to do. Okay, answering to your question. China. What did I learn from China? Wow, there's so many things, right? So I think things they changed so fast. They're still changing fast. But really in China, like 12 months was probably 5 years or 10 years in Europe. I'm not exaggerating. From the level of and sophistication of infrastructure, from the level and sophistication of Chinese companies, the way they think, the way they speak English, the way they operate, how sophisticated they were, their manufacturing processes, their operating processes, their finance processes, their finance departments, things they change so fast that you learn to adapt to change. And you learn to adapt to change fast. So whatever was working last year doesn't work this year anymore. And you have to think about what are the things that I'm doing right now that are not going to work next year. Otherwise, you are literally out of business. This is really what it means. I think for us in the service industry, we were in the management consulting industry most of the time. It really meant how are changing our suppliers. What should we advise our clients who were typically foreign companies to deal with these suppliers, with these joint venture partners? So to do not take things by granted, to do not assume things ever, to always try to think about the things you are not thinking about, adapting to change, a lot of risk management mentality. I think that somehow gets embedded in whoever has spent over a number of years in China. In my case, it was 12 years. So I think adaptability is one. I think another one is entrepreneurial spirit. And I can give you many examples. But one of the examples that I think you will relate the most is the INSEAD community. The INSEAD community in Asia is outstanding. I have to say, I'm not saying that European is not or African is not. I got to engage with South African INSEAD community for a while and Latin America as well. But you can very easily perceive the enthusiasm, the energy in the INSEAD community that you see in the economy. An economy that is growing at 10%, that is 15 trillion or $9 trillion and is growing at a faster speed. You can imagine how the INSEAD community is thinking. You approach someone that you do not know and they make time and they listen to you because they might be missing an opportunity. And that's important, right? Now, when I came to Mexico, I approached the INSEAD community. I got an answer after a couple of weeks, and was like, who are you? Like, well, listen, this is my name and I come from here and I would like to understand who is in town. And it's unlucky, but I stopped engaging with the INSEAD community because probably more, it's a closer community. They don't care much about missing opportunities. They probably explore opportunities with their buddies and and you still have a lot of the INSEAD spirit, right? But what you see in China, in Asia, it's absolutely amazing. And I'm talking about quite the people in positions of powers in Chinese companies. They make time and they talk to you. And that says a lot about the entrepreneurial spirit of Chinese people. That I think it comes a lot with the ethnicity and with who Chinese people are, but I think it comes a lot from the environment. It comes a lot with, hey, people is making money, people is growing, people is doing new things. What am I missing? Should I talk to this guy? Should I talk to this other guy? And this, I know it's still like that. With COVID, things have changed slightly. But I can tell you, like last year, I engaged with 2 classmates in China, which I barely engaged with before. Classmates not from my year, from different years. Man, the important people in the organizations, they made time for me. We had a great conversation, and that's China. So adaptability, entrepreneurship, and I would say risk taking. I think a lot of what we are seeing in terms of Chinese companies winning business to international companies is a lot of Chinese company thinking in terms of, I'm not ready to manufacture this product, but I know I will. So I'm going to bid for the product. I'm going to bid for the project. So they bid for the project even if they don't have the skills. And more often than not, they win the project and they're able to do it and supply. So I think risk-taking, adaptability, and entrepreneurship. I learned all that. You also have a lot of negative things, like any culture and any country, and you have the red tape, and then, it's not a country with a religious background where a set of morals and values are set up and people are guided by those. You don't have that. So, you have a lot of things that you need to understand to deal with. The day-to-day of doing business in China is tough. It's a very hostile environment. A lot of foreigners do not survive 12 months doing business in China. You have the language thing. If you are in your bubble of international buddies, great. That was not my case. If you really want to spend time there and do business there and do well, you need to speak the language. You need to mingle with suppliers. You need to mingle with Chinese counterparts. Foreign companies, 80-90% of the people that were Chinese. You have to manage teams. You have to be a leader to a lot of people who do not speak your native language, and you have to adapt. You cannot just go and do the things in the way you do them in Europe because you will not survive a week. So all those things are very challenging and they're not made for everybody. It's a very tough environment, but it's probably one of the most beautiful experience from a business and personal perspective. That's why I spent so much time there. So it's 12 years, right? I struggled a lot on so many angles. Every second was worthwhile.
Awesome. Yeah. Such a cool period to be out there. I mean, Asia's been such an exciting part of the world to be in over the past couple of decades. And I think not only just seeing the growth in front of you, but the attitudes of the people that are just so filled with optimism and looking for opportunities, as you mentioned. It's really cool that you got to be a part of that in China, especially. And apparently you speak Chinese as well, which is extremely impressive, integrated yourself pretty well into the culture there. Maybe you could tell me, you've told me a bit about why you decided to move to Mexico, but maybe you could tell me a bit more about Diligo, what the company does, what part you played in founding it, and a little bit more about the service and solution that you offer there.
Yeah. So most of my experience in China was management consulting. I did a lot of strategy, a lot of market entry. I did a fair amount of supply chain strategy work. And I did, in my early days in China, I did finance too. So I'm a generalist, becoming more of specialist in professionalizing the finance function of startups and tech businesses. But truth be told, and I think it really goes a lot with what a lot of young people we went through in China. Things, they changed so fast and companies grew so fast that you really had to do a lot of different things and adapt to a lot of different things and develop a different set of skills. So, just to give you an example, when the 2008 crisis came, which in Europe hit it more in 2012, 2013, companies shifted from looking at China as market destination to looking at China as a cost-saving opportunity. So the type of management consulting work that we were being asked by clients shifted more from help me sell my products and define a market entry strategy, which we went into implementation after that, into what China has to offer to my global supply chain in terms of cost savings and cost competitiveness. So we were forced in so many ways to consultants or management consultants to develop a set of skills. So when I arrived to Mexico, which once again, it was a decision made, like, it's not like, oh, I've got this great idea that I'm going to implement in Mexico because Mexico is the right place. I could come up with a story that justifies that, but absolutely that's not the case. And once again, I don't think it was the smartest thing to do. Looking back, was probably the most beautiful and amazing, silly decision I've made. And that's how life works in so many ways. But anyways, we came here with pretty much nothing. So for us was this an adventure, right? So the first thing that I did, and I go into Diligo in a second, right? the first thing that I did is to set up a clinic for my wife. She's a Chinese doctor, and she's doing great with her business. So I helped her with that, is all the construction work, and help her with operations and bring a software in and all the hiring and all the payroll and the tax and the accounting, and help her to set up the business, right? And that was a lot of fun. And after that, I went back into my roots of management consulting, start building a software with a friend that was related to the consulting work that I was doing, was mostly supply chain. We were trying to simplify Alibaba in a way. Alibaba in so many ways is such a fantastic company and such a fantastic tool. It's changed the lives of millions like Amazon. But in so many ways, so many options, it's difficult. So we wanted to develop an app that was simplifying the supplier selection and monitoring and management process that you have in Alibaba. We failed terribly, just for a number of reasons, didn't work out. I was doing some supply chain work, purchasing things from China at the same time, which didn't work. I was very comfortable buying from China and from Asia, but you have to sell whatever you buy. And I was very new in Mexico, and my networks from the demand side that were not strong. So I faced a lot of challenges in terms of I got the products and I got the right price and I got the right procurement strategy, so to say, for a number of companies who didn't want to buy into. Why? Because they were running the business in the way they were running, a better prices, probably, whatever. They have their long-term suppliers. I was not really to make this, call it management consulting / tech business work. I was doing that for probably a year and a half, 2 years. And at that time was pre-COVID, a friend of mine, Ramon, founded this company, Diligo. He was on his own. He's an ex-PricewaterhouseCooper. He was looking into startups. He decided to resign from PricewaterhouseCooper and do the same thing he was doing, which is running finances for tech businesses and startups. He started getting so much traction and so much work. It's a friend from university. We were chatting one day. I explained to him how much I was struggling with what I was trying to do. And he said, listen, you're pretty much doing the same thing I'm doing in finance. You're trying to do more on the supply chain area. Join me as a partner. So many ways I was either a first employee / co-founder. And since then we grew substantially. We are now around 7 people right now. And I joined him and we're doing great. We're growing substantially. We've expanded our client base tremendously in Spain over the last 3 years. And we start kicking off in Mexico right now. So Diligo, what we do, fundamentally, we provide CFO advisory services. So if you're a startup or a tech business and you need a CFO, we are an answer to your business. There's so many external CFOs out there. You have a number of companies and because the tech world and the startup world has been growing so fast. We differentiate ourselves in 3 elements. The first one is transactional experience. So everything that we do is looking into a potential round or sell of the business. So my partner, his DNA is transactions and M&A. So when we look into a startup, the first thing or everything that we do is from a due diligence perspective. So the prisma, the lenses through which we set up a finance department for a startup is looking into a potential due diligence for a round or an exit. And we have loads of experience in that regards. The second element to it is technology. So we have a software allows us to process information fast. I think with the general ledger of a company, we can come out with a financial due diligence in half an hour, literally. That's an internal software that helps us to do a lot of the things that you need to do in a finance department very quick and very fast. And that allows us to take more work and provide more value to clients. And probably the third thing is, I would say, our ability to automate finance process, because what we do to a large extent is to build a finance departments for companies that do not have a finance department. There are things that our software, they do. There are things that we do, but there are a lot of things that can do better. So we look into whatever internal control process you're looking at, if it's budgeting, if it's cash control, if it's the definition of your KPIs and operating model, if you're building your business plan. We automate we were able to document and automate a lot of the processes that a finance department had to deal with. So long story short, we are external CFOs that can build a finance department for startups. And we do that with M&A people with long track record in Big Four and technology. Part of that technology is proprietary and some of it is not. We also leverage third-party service providers, right? More recently, we finished a fundraising process. We raised $500,000 and we are revamping our software into something much more comprehensive that is able to bring a lot of the automation work that I've been describing to you into one-stop solution. So ultimately, we are looking into, hopefully in the next 6 to 12 months, going to market with a software/BI tool that is able to automate core processes of finance departments, which are more targeted to startups with the objective of looking into a round or sell, which implies a lot of risk identification and red flag identification process, risk mitigation and value creation in the finance department.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, you hear a lot about how automation is definitely the way that companies are going these days when it comes to these core processes, whether it's procurement or contracts or even accounting or even finance in your case. It's really interesting. And I think that it's really interesting to see it targeted the way that you've done it with a focus on startups that are looking to sell. I think that's really smart and it's something that'd be really useful for that sort of a business that's basically just trying to scale and sell. And this is something they just need to get done. You've mentioned that your clients have mostly been in Spain thus far and that you're recently launched in Mexico. I was curious if there has been any major difference you've seen in the sales process in Mexico versus Spain, or if there are other major differences between Mexico and Spain or China or any other country you've been in when it comes to doing business.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. For me, Mexico, I was going to say it's a tougher market than China. I don't think it is. It's not the right way to put it. I think me personally, I adapted to China so quick. Language is just part of it, but I think Chinese culture or in the way my mindset or the way I operate, it was, maybe it was the stage of my life. I don't know, but it was very much aligned with where I was. Things that were moving fast, people that were hungry. It was all about doing business and doing good business with the right partners. Plenty of opportunities all over the place. There is one thing in China that always blew my mind, and is that red tape works. Even I would say corruption works. This is a big thing what I'm saying right now. I know you're going live with this and I don't care. I lived 12 years in China. I know what I'm talking about. Some people may disagree with me, but we've always understood, and this is being documented, right, that when you have red tape and corruption, typically it impacts negatively business and GDP growth. In China, it was the opposite. Everybody living in China, especially in those years, they know that corruption was a fundamental part of the way companies operate, private and public, but mostly public and state-owned enterprises. But at the same time was a corruption that in so many ways was conducive to doing business. So was part of the way people was doing business, and that was not stopping foreign direct investment. That was not stopping big contracts taking place. That was not stopping companies making money and making profits and good deals. But this is something that actually stops foreign direct investment in African countries and Latin American countries, because there's a lot of uncertainty, right? There is no legal security. When there is corruption, you don't know if you're going to get your part of the deal. When there are deals under the table, there is nothing on a contract. What is right? What in China it worked, and you had this thing. There are so many ways to put it, right? But in so many ways, I think corrupted because they were corrupted government officials. They knew that they had certain scope to do the wrong thing, but ultimately GDP growth was a goal. And you cannot get that without foreign companies being part of that. So they will channel those sort of unethical behaviors in a certain way, right? But the output was a good output for the country, for the region, for the city, and for a number of companies. But you see a lot in Latin America and in Africa, where I had the chance to work as well, is that most of the times corruption and red tape they're not for the good of the country, so to say. They create such a degree of uncertainty and legal insecurity that scares away investors. And it wasn't like that in China. That was amazing. So I had to deal with bribery and things like that. Of course, we never expose our clients to things like that ever. For us, we knew how to handle this. I was exposed in the way that I was asked certain things and I was suggested certain things. People knew, right, that things would eventually work. You had to do things in a certain way, but they would eventually work. You don't see that in here. So back to answering your question, I certainly found a lot of red tape here too. In so many ways, how to put it, I think people in Mexico prefer to do a bad business with someone that they know than do a good business with someone new. Maybe some of my Mexican friends, they will disagree with me, right? But I think it's a very close community of business people doing business between themselves and getting someone new. The startup world is much better, right? Because it's very open-minded and you welcome new service providers and new clients that, can add something to your business, but still, you really have to get into the loop and get into the loop of the right people. I don't think cold calling, cold emailing works. I think in China it would work. You have to build relationships like in anywhere and you have to know the right people. But I think there were less barriers in China in terms of breaking the ice with a new client or a new service provider. I think Mexico was much more difficult to get to be known and knocking doors. You can think about INSEAD, a good way of approaching a community that is supposed to welcome you and you can ask for advice in terms of how to position yourself in the market. It wasn't that easy. Making friends superficially, it's very easy, but making friends to really understand and get that very deep relationship takes time. So I think in Mexico, you cannot expect quick wins. You have to be in the market. You have to be in the market for a long time. I think, in my opinion, it's more of a pull rather than a push approach. Direct marketing might work for some industries, but in my case, it's been everything around building a profile rather than cold calling people or whatever the case is. I was lucky enough to be so busy with clients in Spain that I didn't have the need to selling into the market. And the business that we have nowadays in the country has been more people that know me for who I am, for the work that I do. They ask me for advice. I share what I know. They get impressed. They want to hear more. They eventually hire my services or our services. So it's a complex market. It's a big country. It's very fragmented. I also think culture in different countries and regions in different cities or states are also different. It's very important to get to know people on the ground. But it's also very important that they know who you are and that you have a reputation, that you have a name, that you have a company that backs you up and that you're able to prove yourself over time. I don't think there is this thing, at least for startups or for new kids on the block about selling something fast because you have a better product or service. I think it takes time, takes a lot of relationship building, and you really have to add value before asking for money. It's a very price sensitive market. And in my case, or in my experience from a business development standpoint, tougher market than China. That's my experience. Outstanding people do not understanding. My wife is half Mexican. My kids are Mexican. My mother-in-law is Mexican. I've got so many Mexican friends. It's such an outstanding country in so many levels, but very complicated from a business development perspective. It's Latin America, but it's not because it's North America. So it has a lot of American mentality, at least in some tech hubs like Monterrey, even Mexico City. But at the same time, it is Latin America from a cultural perspective, right? So I think, those are some of the differences. But for Spanish clients, which are most of our clients nowadays, we are really kicking off in Mexico right now. But Mexico, it's a perfect second step. I mean, from an international growth perspective, you will think European Union is the way to go, but we see more and more tech businesses because of the language and cultural barrier and market size. Where do you want to go? Portugal, France, Italy? Yeah. They have Europe, they have different language, different culture. Mexico, which it's certainly a platform to go into United States, even other parts of Latin America is certainly a beautiful next step for startup and a tech business, which are businesses that are born to scale quick, fast, and internationally. So Mexico really becomes a very good option. So yeah, I think those are some of the differences. But once again, and I'll finish with this comment. I think all these complexities that I'm describing, that they just make part of my personal experience, is what makes it exciting. I think when you look into the same aspects in Spain, in France, in Germany, I was going to say you get bored. Probably you don't, but you don't have the emerging markets dynamics. You don't have the excitement, the novelty, the fragmentation, the risk potential, but also the opportunity potential. I think comes with risk, comes with opportunity, and the other way around, right? So certainly I see so much opportunity in Mexico for what we are doing. And I think we are not getting more traction just because we are not actively selling or exposed to the right environment. But certainly I think that as soon as we get into the right circles, I think our product is going to sell on its own just because it's adding value. It's adding value in Spain, and it will add value in Mexico too. But again, back to the complexity, it's very difficult to get in. I think once you get in and you have a good product and adds value, I think a market like Mexico is larger than Spanish market, for instance, or Portuguese market in so many aspects. So it's a huge opportunity. And also from here onwards, looking into IMF growth projections and potential, Latin America and Mexico has a lot to say, and Brazil.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that's a great place to end it. Really enjoyed the insights. I think this will make a really good podcast. Thanks so much.
No, thanks to you, Nick. Thanks for the invitation. If there is anything that I can do for you, for your podcast, please let me know. I love your content, and I love INSEAD people, really. It's the best program out there as far as I am concerned. So please let me know if there is anything I can do for you, and I wish you all the best.
You too. Yeah, definitely would love to see how things go with Diligo and keep in touch. Yeah, really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
You too, Nick. All the best. Big hack. Take care.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast. To stay up to date on events we may be hosting, emerging market news, and to build your personal network, please feel free to join the INSEAD Alumni Emerging Markets Interest Group on LinkedIn.